Well, hello, BookTube. Welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and you can tell we're in the thick of book season already because I've already done 2 long list reactions, and I'm here to do a shortlist reaction. Basically, I had not really heard of the Stella Prize until Jacqueline from 6 Minutes For Me talked about it, and I was thinking to myself this morning that I really wanted to look at the shortlist and get to know a lot of these authors and books better. So I thought, why not film a video about it? So as you know, if you follow along, part of my reading goal, my reading goal for 2020 is to read outside your comfort zone. Part of that is to read more authors outside of North America and Europe. Obviously, that Australia counts for that. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to look at these nominees a little bit further. So if you're unfamiliar with the Stella Prize, I'm going to refer to my laptop a little bit for notes with both the books and about the Stella Prize, so bear with me. It is a major literary award celebrating Australians' women's writing and an organization that champions cultural change. The prize is named after one of Australia's iconic female authors, Stella Maria Sarah Miles Franklin, who I have not heard of, by the way, so there's another person I need to look into. And it was awarded for the first time in 2013. Both nonfiction and fiction books are eligible for entry. The prize seeks to recognize and celebrate Australian women writers' contribution to literature and bring more readers to books by women and thus increase their sales. I am totally on board for that, so that's another reason. As soon as I saw that, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely doing a video about this. I have not actually looked into the blurbs about the books. I'm familiar with some of them from hearing Jacqueline talk about them, and I've seen at least 2 of them on Instagram in other places, but I'm not super familiar with most of them. I should mention, by the way, one of the other things that the Stella Prize seeks to do, they seek to equip young readers with the skills to question gender disparities and to challenge stereotypes and help girls find their voice. Again, I love that. This is a great prize. I will link the website for the organization down below in the description box, so look for it there. Let's get into the nominees. The first one is See What You Made Me Do by Jess Hill. This is nonfiction. This is one of the ones that I was familiar with. I knew that it was about domestic abuse, but I did not know much more about it. So let's go to the blurb. Domestic abuse is a national emergency. 1 in 4 Australian women has experienced violence from a man she was intimate with, but too often we ask the wrong question. Why didn't she leave? We should be asking, why did he do it? Investigative journalist Jess Hill puts perpetrators and the systems that enable them in the spotlight. See What You Made Me Do is a deep dive into the abuse so many women and children experience, abuse that is often reinforced by the justice system they trust to protect them. Critically, it shows that we can drastically reduce domestic violence, not in generations to come, but today. Combining forensic research with riveting storytelling, See What You Made Me Do radically rethinks how to confront the national crisis of fear and abuse in our homes. Now, obviously, that does not sound like a happy read. Doesn't sound like something pleasant, but it sounds like something important and something that is probably very relevant for America. Not probably, is super relevant for America as well. Because, we do that as well. If a woman is in an abusive relationship, all too often the first thing that people say is, why didn't she leave? And I do think reframing that question to why did he do it, is actually much better. So for sure, this is a book that I would be interested in reading. Again, not a happy book, but an important one. And, sometimes you gotta suck it up and deal with those because we gotta get better as a society. Next one is Diving Into Glass by Caro Llewellyn. It is a nonfiction book, a memoir specifically. Caro Llewellyn was living her dream life in her adopted home of New York, directing an international literary festival. Then one day, running in Central Park, she lost all sensation in her legs. 2 days later, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Caro was no stranger to tragedy. Her father, Richard, contracted polio at the age of 20 and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Dignified, undaunted, and ingenious, he was determined to make every day count, not least seducing his nurse while still confined to an iron lung, then marrying her. Wow. But when Caro herself was blindsided by illness, cut loose from everything she depended on, she couldn't summon any of the grace and courage she had witnessed growing up. She was furious, toxic, humiliated. Only by looking back at her father's extraordinary example was she able to rediscover her own grit and find a way forward, rebuilding her life shard by shard. An emotionally brutal memoir of family, vulnerability, and purpose, Diving Into Glass is a searing, often funny portrait of the realities of disability and an intimate account of 2 lives filled with vigor and audacity. that is something that I would absolutely like to read. Again, not necessarily happy, but that experience. I also really, I really love Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, in which Alison Bechdel, who is a lesbian, struggles and grapples with the difference of her being an out lesbian and living her truth, and her father, who was a closeted gay man. So I love when people kind of grapple with their family identities and their family history. So the idea of her trying to reconcile her reaction with her father's is interesting, but just the reaction of the situation in general is very compelling. So I would be very curious to read this. Up next, we have our first fiction nominee. It's There Was Still Love by Pavel Paret. Okay, this is broken into 3 different sections. The first one is Prague, 1938. Eva flies down the street from her sister's. Suddenly, a man steps out, a man wearing a hat. Eva runs into him, hits the pavement hard. His hat is in the gutter. His anger slaps Eva, but his hate will change everything as war forces so many lives into small brown suitcases. Next section, Prague, 1980. No one sees Ludek. A young boy can slip right under the heavy blanket that covers this city. The fear cannot touch him. Ludek is free, and he sees everything. The world can do what it likes. The world can go to hell for all he cares because Bobby is waiting for him in a warm flat. His whole world. Next section, Melbourne, 1980. Molly Lee Ka's grandma holds her hand as they climb the stairs to their 3rd floor flat. Inside, the smell of warm pipe tobacco and homemade cakes. Here, Mana and Bill have made a life for themselves and for their granddaughter. A life imbued with the spirit of Prague and the loved ones left behind. Pavel Paret's deeply emotional insight and stellar literary talent shine through in this love letter to the strong women who bind families together despite dislocation and difference. It is a tender and beautifully told story of memory, family, and love, because there is still love no matter what. Well, I love that. I think the first 3, the descriptions of the 3 sections did not grab me too much, to be honest, but that last part right there, talking about how they tie together and the overall message of the book, did really interest me, because those are things that check a lot of boxes for me. The idea of family, dislocation, distance, memory, family, love, those are all things that draw me in. So that right there made me more interested in reading this book. This is one of the ones that I had not heard of at all going into this. So if you have feedback, let me know. By the way, I also love the cover because it has that beautiful painting of a fox. I will put it right here. It's just beautiful. So if you've read this, I would love feedback. Drop it down below. And up next we have Here Until August by Josephine Rowe. This is short stories. These superbly crafted stories follow the fates of characters who, by choice or by force, are traveling beyond the boundaries of their known worlds. We meet them navigating reluctant partings and uncertain returns, or biding the disquieting calm that often precedes decisive action. An agoraphobic French émigré watches terrorist videos compulsively as she minds a dog named Chavez. A young couple weather the interiority of a Montreal winter, more attuned to their illicit goings-on of their neighbors than to their own hazy unfolding futures. A Western Australian family cross from mainland to island, from disaster towards a faltering redemption. Other stories play out in locations just beyond the brink of familiarity, flooded townships and distant lakes, sunlit woodlands, or paths bright with ice, places of unpredictable access and spaces scrubbed from maps. From the Catskills to the snowy mountains, the abandoned island outports of Newfoundland to the sprawl of Australian metropolis, this scintillating collection from one of Australia's most gifted writers shows us how the places we inhabit shape us in ways both remote and intimate. That also sounds interesting. I have not read a whole lot of short stories lately. So I think the last one I read was Blacklight, back in November by Kimberly Parsons. So I'd kind of need to get back to them. So that sounds like a collection that would be really interesting to read. And now we have another fiction, The Yield by Tara June Winch. The yield in English is the reaping, the things that man can take from the land. In the language of the Wiradjuri, yield is the things you give to, the movement, the space between things. By Yanha. Knowing that he will soon die, Albert, Poppy, Ganawindi, takes pen to paper. His life has been spent on the banks of the Murrumbee River at Prosperous House on Massacre Plains. Albert is determined to pass on the language of his people and everything that was ever remembered. He finds the words on the wind. August Gondowindi has been living on the other side of the world for 10 years when she learns of her grandfather's death. She returns home for his burial, racked with grief and burdened with all she tried to leave behind. Her homecoming is bittersweet as she confronts the love of her kin and news that Prosperous is to be repossessed by a mining company. Determined to make amends, she endeavors to save the land, a quest that leads her to the voice of her grandfather and into the past, the stories of her people, the secrets of the river. Profoundly moving and exquisitely written, Tara June Winch's The Yield is the story of a people and a culture dispossessed. But it is as much a celebration of what was and what endures, and a powerful reclaiming of indigenous language, storytelling, and identity. Boom. Of the fiction ones, this is probably the one that has stood out to me the most so far. Diving into Glass still sounds really interesting, and so to See What Made You Do. So I think right now those are the three that are jumping out to me the most. Let's see what the last one has in store. It is another fiction. It's The Weekend by Charlotte Wood. People went on about death bringing friends together, but it wasn't true. The graveyard, the stony dirt, that's what it was like now. Despite the three women knowing each other better than their own siblings, Sylvie's death had opened up strange caverns of distance between them. Four older women have a lifelong friendship of the best kind, loving, practical, frank, and steadfast. But when Sylvie dies, the ground shifts dangerously for the remaining three. Can they survive together without her? They are Jude, a once famous restaurateur, Wendy, an acclaimed public intellectual, and Adele, a renowned actress now mostly out of work. Struggling to recall exactly why they've remained close all these years, the grieving women gather for Christmas at Sylvie's old beach house, not for festivities, but to clean the place before it's sold. Without Sylvie to maintain the group's delicate equilibrium, frustrations build and painful memories press in. Fraying tempers, an elderly dog, unwelcome guests, and too much wine collide in a storm that brings long-buried hurts to the surface and threatens to sweep away their friendship for good. The Weekend explores growing old and growing up and what happens when we're forced to uncover the lies we tell ourselves. Sharply observed and excruciatingly funny, this is a jewel of a book, a celebration of tenderness and friendship that is nothing short of a masterpiece. It sounds interesting, but here's my thing with this. That premise sounds kind of familiar. It has been done a fair amount. Now, that doesn't mean that this is a bad book. It just means that, for me at least, to handle that topic, you need to bring something fairly new to the table, have a unique spin on it. It's like, if you ever watch cooking or baking shows, which I do obsessively, if you cook something simple, it basically has to be perfect, because since you did something simple, the judges really want to be wowed by your execution. So to me, that is the description of this book. Because it's so familiar, it needs to be done really well. So it doesn't immediately grab me the way the three that I had mentioned before did, but it could be done well. So if you have read this book or are familiar with Charlotte Wood, leave a comment in the description, not the description box, but leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought of it, because I would be really interested in that. So there you go. Those are the nominees on the shortlist. Again, See What You Made Me Do, Diving Into Glass, and The Yield are the three that jump out to me the most. I'm not going to try to predict which one is going to win because I'm still new to the Stella Prize. I would not even pretend to know how they judge. But of the others, There Was Still Love and Here Until August still sound really interesting. And The Weekend sounds interesting. I just want to know more about it from somebody who has read it before committing. So I would say that seems like a solid shortlist. If you are familiar with the Stella Prize or have thoughts about it, I would love to hear them. Drop them down below. By the way, I am fully aware as I'm recording this and staring at myself in my phone that I am wearing a shirt that says Italia while I talk about Australian books, and that is interesting, but I guess I gotta be me. So there you go. Anyway, like I said, I would love to hear your thoughts about these nominees and about the Stella Prize in general. If there are other prizes that that are coming up that you're excited about, obviously I already covered the long list for the Women's Prize and the International Booker. I will link those videos down below, by the way. So just let me know. I'd love to hear it. And thank you for your time. And I will be back again. Until next time, happy reading.